Okey-dokey. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started tonight. Um, First of all, thanks for coming. And we're going to cover quite a bit of information tonight. We're going to go into the weeds on a few of these things. You're going to learn tonight that identifying skippers is a little bit like identifying grasses. It can be quite challenging. You need good views or good images to pull off identification sometimes. Um, but before we get into the grass skippers tonight, or the folded wing skippers, I wanted to add a couple of things, or talk about a couple of things very briefly about what we did not, um, what I didn't cover the last time for the open wing skippers. So if we can get this started. So I wanted to throw this picture up of a northern cloudy wing I just recently took. And this is one of our more common open wing skippers. But one of the things you're going to notice about this particular image is that it actually has a white fringe on the hind wing, which most of the ones that we see do not have where we are doing our surveys at the park or in the San Antonio area. I took this on a butterfly survey out towards Medina a month or so ago. And even though this happens with some of the western individuals of the northern cloudy wing, I wanted to show this to you so that if we ever encounter a northern cloudy wing in this particular area, that there is a potential they could have a white fringe on that hind wing. So I just wanted to put that in there since I encountered that for the first time ever, I think, since I've been in Texas. So I wanted to share that with you. And the second thing I wanted to share was a species that I didn't talk about last time that I wanted to go ahead and include, and that's the false dusky wing. And the reason for that is that it is found just to our west, it's found just to our east, it's found to our south, but it's not found immediately in this area very often. It's pretty rare. Um, it's a small dusky wing, open wing. You'll notice that it does have a little bit of fringe, not nearly as well developed as even that northern cloudy wing to the right on your screen, but it does have enough of it to notice it. It's smaller than the other dusky wings, certainly much smaller than the funereal that we typically associate with having a white fringe on the hind wing. The other thing it has another couple of characteristics that actually help identify it. Well, first of all, notice the way the wings are folded. They're actually they're out flat, but they're kind of curled around or wrapped around a little bit, and that was very distinctive of this one that I saw out at the Medina area where I did it, helped with that same butterfly count where I encountered this northern cloudy wing. So that wraparound effect there on the wings is noticeable that I don't see with a lot of these. Um, the second thing that you'll notice with this one actually has kind of a blue-gray band right here in the submarginal area, or marginal area, I should say. It's pretty distinctive and it's very different than any of the other dusky wings that we have. So very unique. And then the third thing to notice is this little patch right here at the end of the cell. This part of the wing is called the cell. And this brown patch that we have right here is real noticeable and it runs into that bluish gray field right there. And the reason I wanted to show you this is because the host plant of this particular butterfly is something that you might actually see around our area, and that is scarlet pea, this little flower right here. It's fairly common in our area, scattered, but common, I would call common. It's a low-growing herbaceous perennial. It has an underground woody root system, but it dies back to the ground every year, and it's, again, very kind of weak in terms of the above-ground part. And that's in our areas. I'll show you in just a moment. The other ones, there are two other species of this Indigofera genus, and this one is called Lindheimer's indigo. Notice the flowers are fairly similar to this guy over here, but this is a shrub, a woody shrub. The East Texas species also looks very similar to this, grows about 4 to 6 feet tall, both of them. And so they put on a lot more vegetation on these bushes as opposed to this low growing bush. And this might be partially to explain why we don't see these butterflies in our immediate area. And I want to kind of show that to you based on maps from iNaturalist. So on this one, this is actually the range of observations of the dusky wing in question. You'll notice it's out to the west of our area here, San Antonio. It's out to the kind of the east, the south, down in south part of San Antonio, going this way. So remember what this looks like. Here we are, kind of down in here. So we're right on the edge, but we are definitely kind of in a hole right here in terms of why those butterflies haven't been found here, at least as iNaturalist has recorded them. So first I wanted to show you the eastern species, Indigofera. This is just called indigo, and it's East Texas species down into the Corpus area. You'll notice a little bit of it just on the edge of San Antonio, a little bit up, has been recorded here. I didn't check all of these to see if they were research graded, but generally it's to the east of the I-35 corridor. Then you have the Lindheimer's indigo, which does show some observations in our area, and then farther west, the bulk of them are to the west of the observation. So this is a little bit misleading in terms of numbers, but generally you have the western woody species, the eastern woody species, and then you have this guy. This is our scarlet pea, huge distribution, which makes it even more interesting is why is there a hole when you come back to the species map in this area? And it may just be that the plants are so small that they just can't sustain a population of this dusky wing. So I just wanted to kind of show you when you get down into literally the weeds of these things, it kind of explains why does a certain butterfly occur here and it doesn't occur, 70 miles away from that area. Sometimes it comes down to the specific host plants, or even if a potential host plant is present, it simply may not be the right species that can sustain the butterfly. So I just wanted to share that information for you. Now to get back to where we're supposed to be tonight, just a review of defining the skippers. There are several thousand species. Virtually all of them have a hooked or bent antenna, which we talked about the last time. They have those thick muscular thoraxes that allow for very rapid flight. And when we're talking about a lot of the closed wing skippers, we're talking about really fast, flitting sort of thing from flower to flower. Turns out a lot of our skippers that we have here in Texas are migratory in that during the summer, late spring, summer, into early fall, a lot of them move north. So where I grew up in Iowa, we have records of them, but they're always fairly rare, and it's usually later in the season. So, but a lot of them do move. And of course, there are two main groups that we're going to talk about that are in here tonight. So we've got the skipperlings and the grass skippers. These are the two little subfamilies for tonight's talk. Now, a few reminders regarding skippers, because again, I said at the beginning that it's kind of like identifying grasses. So we want to be cautious and careful when we do that. Sometimes I think, and I'm guilty of this, we get going on a butterfly survey and we've been doing it long enough that we just make sometimes some assumptions that are based on what we think it might be, as opposed to what it really is. So I think it's real important for us to make sure that we are careful with our identifications. And I'll show you some examples tonight about what makes some of that identification stuff tricky. So careful study does not always involve a positive ID. It's okay. In our new data sheet, we're actually putting a thing in there called skipper SPA. And if we can't tell, we just put a slot down for that. It's okay. At least we're still documenting the presence of a butterfly. Range maps, those range maps are in those field guides for a reason. You can oftentimes separate individual species based on the range maps, although just because there's a range map doesn't mean one didn't fly an extra 50 miles outside of the current range map. And all of the books are old, so that's constantly being adjusted. And as more users of iNaturalist and Pomona and places or sites like that are taking pictures, we're learning more about an expanding distribution of some of these from what was traditionally thought was the location. With the closed wing skippers, remember a lot of times they purchase with their wing or perch with their wings, can be either folded up like this and kind of triangle shaped, as I'll show you, or they can have the lower wings bent down perpendicular with the ground, and then their upper wings are either held straight up or out at an angle. So keep that in mind when, and all of those can help sometimes with identification depending on the species. And then another thing, and we're going to show some examples of this, the males and females, there's some sexual dimorphism with a lot of these individual species. So you want to be aware of that the patterns may be varied a little bit because in case one's a female or the other one are male. So keep that in mind. So let's go through some general identification tips before we get into the actual species that we're looking at tonight. So when the wings are held above the abdomen, they form that triangle. So you can see that's pretty distinctive. And this is distinctive posture for a closed-winged skipper or a grass skipper. And of course, they're called grass skippers because the majority of them lay their eggs on various grasses. Not all, but a lot of them do. So they've kind of been lumped together and called grass skippers. So one of when the wings are folded like this, you can get a really good look at the characteristics of the hind wing. The underside, this is the underside of the hind wing, obviously, and they'll have patterns on here. There's a lot of variation. But when we're identifying skippers, that's typically where I begin. I'll begin by looking at this. I'm not worried about the antenna. I'm not worried about the color of the abdomen or the thorax or the mouth or the around the eye. That's where I'm going to look first to try to get my best identification markers for a particular skipper. Secondarily, I may look up here on the tip of the forewing because sometimes they'll have spot patterns up in here that can be helpful, but there's a lot of overlap. The other thing to keep in mind is sometimes that wing, the forewing, will be pulled down a little bit. So you sometimes can see the spot patterns if they exist, or sometimes you cannot, based on where that wing is positioned when the butterfly is perched. To give you some variations, you can go from where there's almost no marks at all, so that can often be very helpful in identification, believe it or not, to a distinct pattern where you see a nice shiny white line. That's pretty distinctive of that particular species we'll be covering tonight. Whoops, let me go back. And then we can also have patterns where it's a series of dots or spots, and you just have to learn what those could be. And then other times we have patterns that are more I call it kind of spidery-like or cobwebby-like, where you have these different distinct lines of dark and light and kind of woven together there and very distinctive. So those are some examples of what we might expect when we're looking at these closed-wing skippers. And then, of course, this is the example of when the body is with the lower wings are held flat, level with the ground, and the upper wings are then held at an angle 45 up to a 45-degree angle out from the body. And so when we look at this gives us the opportunity to actually look at the upper side, the dorsal side of the hind wing, and see what that pattern is, and then also the dorsal side or upper side of the forewing. And sometimes those would be really, really helpful, especially with some of the gold colored skippers, if you will, because the patterns are so distinct. So keep in mind, that's where we're wanting to look. If the wings are open, it's always good to get a picture of that because that can be most helpful. And then, and when those wings are open, sometimes there's a term that you'll hear or you'll read about called the stigma. The stigma is at the base of that upper forewing, and in the case of this Huron skipper, you can see it's a very distinct black mark right there. So sometimes that you'll see the word stigma, and that's where that's located, just so that you have that awareness. So here are some examples that we have here with the wings open. Again, here's the top side of the hind wing right there, showing a distinct pattern. Here's a little bit of a view of the this would actually be the underside of this forewing. This is the top of the other forewing. So it can be a little confusing there. So keep that in mind. You'll notice that top and bottom, there are a little bit different patterns there. This picture, the top side of the hind wings don't really help you other than the outer edging is very dark. But because of the fact that the forewings are folded open so much, you can't get a full view of that hind wing. So that's going to happen from time to time. And then again, here's another view. You can clearly see the upper side of the hind wing, and a lot of the bird books, including the Kaufman Guide, will talk to you about what the upper wing looks like versus the lower wing. So you want to get used to looking for those characteristics. And then here we can see the underside of the hind wing on the right side and the upper side of the hind or the forewings, excuse me, the forewings right here. So those actually look fairly similar, but sometimes there's some distinctions there that you'll want to watch for. So just to give you some examples of those. We also have that sexual dimorphism that I mentioned. These two one is a male, one is a female. These are fiery skippers. You can see that the patterns are distinctly different. It's on the forewing, it's almost kind of reversed in terms of yellow and black. And then you can just see the degree of yellow and black. And the reason I show you this is because you're gonna see these on some of these, and that can be helpful, but you need to make sure that your field guides, the big field guides have pictures of them with their wings open. Um, the little flash guides generally don't, so that makes it a little more tricky. On some of it can make it a little more tricky. These just kind of help confirm what we're looking at. And we don't really look at male versus female on our checklists, but again, just to show you the variation that happens between the males and the females. And the other thing we have to be careful with is age of the butterflies. When a butterfly starts out fresh like this here on Skipper, very beautiful pattern, very boldly marked, everything. I mean, it just looks fresh to me anyway. So recently hatched, it's got all of its scales. And of course, over time, these scales wear off, literally fall off over time. And so here is both females, but look at how much older this female is, where the pattern, it's even changed. The whole thing has changed color really by the loss of scales. And you'll notice also that the pattern becomes much less distinct. So you have to really get a good look. You can see this characteristic right here, this dark area right here is still there, but instead of being nice and black and offset by everything around it, it barely blends in almost with everything else. But again, you can still see the white kind of bar that goes through there. You can see some of the white marks here that match here. So it's identifiable, but that's another thing that makes it a little tricky, especially with these skippers. So all butterflies' wings wear over time, but it's with the skippers that it seems to be the most challenging sometimes, and particularly the grass skippers. So let's go ahead and go into the species accounts, and we will get started with the fiery skipper, which is one of our most common grass skippers in our survey area that we have at the park and in this entire area. It is probably one of the more easily identifiable butterflies when the wings are folded, in that you can see the male and the female are sexually dimorphic, even with on the underside of the hind wing. But you'll notice this series of black spots here that's pretty distinctive, kind of cheetah striped or cheetah spotted, if you will, a little bit. The male has fewer of those spots here. And then we've already seen the male and the female differences. This is going to be a fairly common, it's very bright, kind of a bright gold skipper that we see. We see it much of the year. It can be one of the most common on any survey. If skippers are present, this is probably going to be one that we're going to encounter most of the time. So we would just want to keep an eye on looking out for this one. And again, fairly easy to identify. What I've tried to do tonight is we'll look at a few species and then we'll kind of put them on the same screen together so you can see the differences based on the photography that we've got here. Again, there are the spots that make it fairly distinct. There's only one butterfly that also has some of these spots. And in our area, it's a very uncommon to rare butterfly in our Guadalupe surveys. However, in San Antonio, as you'll find out, they're a little bit more common and then more common to the south and east. So again, I wanted to compare these two because we're going to go next to the Huron skipper. But one of the characteristics of the fiery skipper that you'll notice in the field guides is it says that it has short antenna. And short versus long is a little bit relative, especially when you're only looking at one butterfly and you don't have them side by side. But you can see that the antenna on this fiery skipper are short relative to the length of the Huron skipper. And even though the Huron skipper is just a tad bigger than the fiery, there's not enough of a difference. You can clearly see that these are much more extended, and that's more typical of most of our skippers. So that characteristic, while it's in the field guides and they ask you to look for it, it takes a lot of looking at a lot of skippers before you finally kind of click in and go, oh yeah, there's those short antennas. So just keep that in mind, that that is a characteristic that's used. It's not one that I use in the field. I might look at photographs, but even when I'm looking at photographs, they've got so many other characteristics. There's no sense in fiddling with those too. And the last thing I'll say too is this butterfly, the fiery, also has a stigma. And here's that stigma again on the Huron skipper. But this one is much more narrow, and it actually looks like it's kind of broken into two slices, if you will, that are off center a little bit. This one, as we're going to see in the next photograph of the next species, the Huron skipper, that is a super valuable identification mark. And here is the Huron skipper. Again, right here, you can see the stigma here when the wings are open. When those, and they like to open their wings a lot, it seems to me. So watch for that black stigma, that big, thick, long black stigma, and that'll help you identify a Huron skipper almost every time. Again, here's a fresh female. We've already seen that picture. Here's a little bit older female, still has that pattern, kind of that big swoosh of white right there. A little bit of white here. You can see that on both, on this one as well. And then this dark patch right in here kind of comes in handy. But notice it's surrounded on white in the front and surrounded on by whitish, if you will, around the other side. And then it has these white markings in here as well. This happens to be the male. They're quite different looking, I think. This looks like a big patch of kind of off yellow surrounded by some brown, almost the opposite of what you see here. So these can be a little bit confusing. So you want to look at them closely, but if you see this patch right here, that's probably going to be a male, and they're never going to be as bright as the fresh female, at least in my experience. So keep that in mind when you're looking at the Huron skipper. I should tell you that the Huron skipper is the one that used to be called the Sachem. But what happened is and you're going to learn more about this as we go through tonight's presentation. There's currently a lot of work looking at the genetics of butterflies, in particular skippers. And what they're finding out is there's through genetic testing and analysis, these researchers are splitting a lot of these butterflies. And so the Sachem, when you look in the current field guides, it shows its range in eastern North America, sweeping down through Texas and going all the way out to California, up to Oregon and Washington. Well, they've determined that the ones in Oregon and Washington are different from the ones in Texas and to the east. And so they've split those two species out. Ours are now Huron skippers. iNaturalist reflects that now. And if you go out to California, you're going to get back to where the Sachem skipper is. The differences, I don't understand the genetic differences, but they're more than 1% difference in there, all that stuff. There are articles out there that you can read more of that if you're into genetics. But the Huron skipper was the Sachem. So, and you'll hear me on the survey still want to call the bloody thing Sachem because that's what I'm used to after all these years. So, and you might do the same exact thing. One of the other things I want you to notice as we go through this, I did put, normally I just put the host plants, and I'll just list a few. What's surprising about a lot of these is that a lot of the host plants for these skippers are non-native grasses here in the United States. So for the example, this one, St. Augustine grass, crabgrass, Bermuda grass. In fact, I have a little bit of St. Augustine left in our yard, in the front yard for the dog's purpose. And the other day I was sitting out in the chair watching things, and I saw a fiery skipper actually get down in the St. Augustine grass and lay eggs. So it makes me wonder, well, what are the native ones that they feed on? It's kind of a quandary as to what's going on there. Is why are they only being reported as laying eggs on these non-natives? So it's kind of interesting. Then the third species in this little group, this first little cluster, is the whirlabout. They changed the genus name. And then, as we're going to show, they've also split. this species into 8 species, basically. Um, and so the whirlabout for us now um, is I'll show you some maps and we'll explain what's going on. But basically, the whirlabout, the way you identify it, and we have not recorded this at Guadalupe River State Park. I have seen it at the Botanical Gardens in San Antonio. I know we've seen it. If you go to South Texas and you go farther and then towards the coast, you'll see it more often. But in our area, for whatever reason, it just doesn't show up. At least not yet. Let's put it that way. But butterflies have wings and they can fly. But basically, what you're looking at with the whirlabout is this little patch of dark spots on the end of the um, underside of the hind wing. These I always think of them as like if you were getting fingerprinted. That looks like four fingerprints right there to me. There's a couple of little black spots here, but this is going to be the one that tells us that this is likely to be a male. And then in terms of the female, it's going to look like this. You can see the black margin here, some black spots here, black spot here, and then this kind of outline pale area that kind of offsets them. You also notice that the males and females are sexually dimorphic, or these are both males. The female is actually all dark with only a couple of hints of orange spots. But these can actually be helpful in identifying the whirlabout from the fiery or the sacum. Sorry, there I go saying sacum, the Huron skipper. So anyway, I want to show you this because this is where things start to get more confusing when the genetics start popping up. So this whirlabout, this is a map of the whirlabouts sightings in our area. Okay. Notice that down at the base of the map, down there in the valley, there's lots and lots of orange squares. So they identified down there. Well, recently, because of this paper, um, they have split these into two species, including this Praeseps species down here. And you'll notice now all of the recordings for Praeseps are basically from Kingsville, one in each of those. I don't even know if those are research grade or not, but the majority of them are being seen now down here in the valley to the point where when I go down there and I identify them as the whirlabout, they go, oh, no, that's a Praeseps. Well, I want to show you how complicated this is. These two butterflies over here, A and B, are the whirlabout. These two are the new species Praeseps, which, by the way, doesn't have a common name right now. It's just Hedoni Praeseps. And when you look at them, good luck identifying them in the field. They look fairly similar. They've got the spots that are scattered around, spots scattered around, spots. They've got that wash going through the middle of those great big spots. There's not a whole lot of difference in here. So I should also caution that some people so far are not accepting these as new species. iNaturalist does separate these two out. Fortunately for us, we can be comforted in that if we see something like this up in our area, at least for now, it's going to be the whirlabout and not this newly named species that has no common name. Again, I just wanted to show you an example of how this can be very tricky with these butterflies, especially now that they're doing more genetic analysis on these species. All right, so let's compare the fiery and the female and the whirlabout male. You can see again the black spots on the fiery. Here are those fingerprints on the whirlabout. Notice that the pattern is different. These spots are much larger. There's a significant gap here between these large spots and these small ones right here. There's a couple another pair of fainter ones right there. And this one, they're here in the same same areas, but they're much smaller. And this is a much bolder colored, I think, orange gold skipper than this one is over here. So those are the big differences. And again, this one so far at our park, Guadalupe has not been recorded there. So keep that in mind. All right, then this is the male, by the way, just to show you fewer spots, but again, very different from the whirlabout male. All right, then we're going to compare these two guys. We're going to compare a Huron skipper with the whirlabout. And again, you can see this big patch of orangey kind of colored with some little brown spotting here. Here's this patch here. Notice it's a little more elongate, whereas this is more rounded, if you will, and loosely, if you can. So there can be some similarity there, but I think again, knowing the range, understanding where they should be found or not found, it'll help you identify and separate these two fairly easily. And the spots here, even though they're not the most distinct things, they are still present, those big fingerprint type spots, whereas these are much smaller and kind of at a different angle. So keep that in mind. Then if we look at the butterflies with the wings open, these are in the case of males, by the way. You'll notice differences in the patterns. This one big stigma right here. Here's a large stigma here, but notice that there's an extension of it right here. And this one, we've got the 1, 2, 3 skinnier dark bars there as well. So again, at least with the males on these three species, you can tell them apart by looking at that. And not that we're looking for the male, but it just helps you distinguish what's going on with the wings. So keep that in mind. All right. And then on the upper side of the hind wing, notice that this particular, at least on this specimen, it's a real short, sharp cut right there. Whereas this one's kind of wobbly, it kind of zigzags back and forth in terms of the dark pattern on the outer side. And again, we really can't see it very well there, but it's much reduced, or it's much broader on this one as well. So something to keep in mind. All right, so now we're going to move to another kind of off gold butterfly outside of those three that have fairly distinctive marks. And we're going to go to the southern broken dash. This is another similar sized butterfly. I only inserted this picture of the male because it's the first time I've ever seen one with the wings open. And that was at a San Antonio butterfly survey recently. And you'll notice a lot of dark on the top side of the wings, but then this gold right here along the leading edge of the forewing. But what we're looking for on this one is this little distinct pattern right here. And when I say distinct, I use that word loosely. It's a beautiful orangey brown butterfly, very crisp and fresh. But when we start to look at this, and what I did is I flipped this around, you can kind of make out a 3 right here. And I flipped it around so you could actually see it was a 3 and not a backwards 3. But once you see that little 3 mark right here in our area, there's not another butterfly that you're going to confuse with this. So the southern broken dash, that is the pattern you're looking for. There's really no distinct markings on the tip of the forewings. This is what you're looking for on a fresh specimen. It's a little bit better as the specimen wears, as the butterfly wears. It becomes a little more juicy to try to identify what it is. If you were to go to the valley, there's another one called a common Milana down there that looks a lot like this, but it has a darker spot right here, a more obvious spot than this one is right here. So just keep an eye on this little butterfly here. Sometimes they can be overlooked because of the way they are. And I want to show you what I mean by that. So here are 3 butterflies that look somewhat similar. Here is the southern broken dash. Here is the orange skipperling. Now the orange skipperling, notice it's more compact top to bottom. It's also much tinier, so you shouldn't confuse these two. But again, they both have that kind of orangish color to them. And then one that we're going to talk about in a little bit is the Julia skipper. Again, fairly similar, about the same size based on what I know. And there is a hint of a pattern right here, but it's not a 3. And then also you'll notice these 3 little dots here on the forewing. So similar but different. But again, careful looking with binoculars or taking a picture with a camera is always helpful with these skippers. Now we'll move into a couple of the darker skippers. This particular one is probably certainly one of our most common dark skippers, and this is the clouded skipper. And there are times when every other one of the butterflies that I'll see where I'm out wandering seems to be a clouded skipper. And there are a couple of things that help you identify it. First of all, it's a lot darker, it's a lot browner, almost deep brown when it's fresh on the female that you see there. And then one of the things that I like to have fun. One of the things I like to look for is this little tornado patch right here in the center of the hind wing. It reminds me of a tornado, especially if you look at this one right here. But kind of the tail of a tornado. which helps me identify it. Spot pattern up here to three pretty distinct spots here. You can see this on each of the specimens there and there and there. That helps. You'll notice there's not a lot of orange in here. The other thing to notice about this one is that when they are fresh, you'll see this purplish tinge here and here as well. And as they age, again, you can see it a little bit here, but when an old specimen, that orange goes or that purple goes away, here it is fading out a little bit. This is a little bit older one than this guy right here. And when I say older, I'm talking a few days. It doesn't seem to take long for that purplish wash to kind of wash away. So that's the clouded skipper. Again, fairly common in our area. This is one that feeds on our native grasses, so that's kind of neat to see. Um, but don't be surprised if we end up with, especially as we go deeper into the summer, we end up with a lot of clouded skippers. Now, this is another butterfly that they've done some genetic work on. And just very briefly, these are all the iNaturalist sightings of the clouded skipper. And then recently, after a paper was published, they came up with decided based on genetic analysis that you've got a new species called the ochreous skipper. And as a result, when I go down to the valley and I take a picture of what I'm assuming is a clouded skipper, it always comes back now as an ochreous skipper. This is the actual page out of the scientific paper. The first two, A and B, are the clouded skipper. The bottom two are the ochreous skipper, male and female. And I guarantee you, if you look at this guy right here and compare it to this guy right here, there's a lot of similarity right there. And this is with the dorsal surface. You see one extra spot there that this one doesn't have until you flip it upside down, and then it is there faintly. Good luck trying to identify these two butterflies when they're in the same overlapping territory. But the thought is now that the ochreous is a southern butterfly, whereas the clouded skipper, it ranges more to the north. It has a very wide distribution in the United States. But again, I guess in some ways we can say we're lucky that we don't live down in the valley, or we would be having we'd get a lot of species, but we'd be having some challenges with identifications. Now, here is the dun skipper. This is another dark skipper. It's a small skipper, a little smaller than the clouded. Almost no marks. So it's distinctive by that it's a dark color with no marks, almost never marks. I don't ever say, sometimes there's a spot, but like in this one right here, there's this hint of a spot. But the biggest thing around our area is that they have gold scales on their head that are really distinctive here, here. Whoops, let me go back. So we've got that right there. A little less of it right there. And then this one, I took a picture of a dun skipper up in Kansas because I wanted to show that if you travel around, it's sure a dun skipper, but notice that the lack of gold right here. And I don't think that's an age-related thing. There's a hint of gold here, but that can vary. So I show you that just because sometimes, especially on an older specimen, you might not see that gold. It may have worn to kind of a tannish brown. But again, very common skipper. We see it quite a lot all through the year, I believe. So don't be surprised if some days on some surveys, you're going to get a lot of these guys. Another skipper that's got that brownish sheen to it, but is not real dark like the previous two we saw is the Eufaula. The Eufaula is kind of a bigger skipper, certainly bigger than the dun and a little bit bigger than the clouded skipper, but it's kind of a pale wash to it, kind of a palish gray, brown, tan kind of color. Notice it does have these three white marks right here. You can see it here when the wings are actually open, and then plus a couple more spots. But usually, a lot of times you don't see these three spots. And this butterfly is best identified by the fact that there's nothing to identify it. And I call this the Eastern Phoebe of our skippers because Eastern Phoebe is kind of identified by being as plain as possible. And the Eufaula is one that's the same way. And again, it's a little bit more elongate than a lot of our skippers. Notice the triangle is a little shallower, so it doesn't stand up as high. And that's pretty typical of this butterfly. Kind of has a rounded edge to towards the tip of the forewing as opposed to being straight out. So this Eufaula can be quite common. I know I keep saying that, but it is one that we see frequently on our surveys. And the size and the shape are often very good characteristics as well as the lack of any markings. So if we compare those last three butterflies here, you can see what we're talking about. Here's dark, there's the gold on the head of the dun. Here's the lack of markings except for those three little marks right there on the Eufaula. And then you've got that little tornado-like mark right here with the dots here on the hind wing as well. So similar but different enough that hopefully identification of these three isn't too challenging for anybody. Now we're going to move into some butterflies that have spots, different kind of pattern. This is our most bold, probably, I would guess, of all of our skippers, this has the boldest pattern. And yet, unfortunately, it's one of the least seen that we have around here, which is too bad because it's so easy to identify for us. The green skipper feeds on a lot of our native grasses here. They are absolutely gorgeous. This used to be referred to as the black dust skipper because there's a structure up here on the forewing called the stigma of the forewing that actually had these little tiny dust particles, scales, that were black, and that's why it got its name. But now they call it the green skipper, which is probably easier to remember. Although you don't see a whole lot of green. I kind of see some maybe hints of green in here, but to me, it's more of a rich yellow, gold, brown sort of mix that maybe there's a little hint of green. But these big, bold spots are the thing that's going to help identify it. The tricky thing with this butterfly is even though we have picked it up at Honey Creek and at the park on fairly rare occasions, you can see the distribution, or here we are down here. You'll notice it's mostly north of San Antonio. So if you see one in San Antonio, you've seen something pretty neat. But generally, it's going to be more to the east or the west of the I-35 corridor going through here out towards the western part of the state and the northern part of the state. So again, not super common in our area, but always a good get. So keep your eyes open for it. I've seen it maybe 3 times at the park and Honey Creek in all the years that I was over there. So it's always a good one to have. All right, so now we're going to go into a couple of species that are really, really challenging. And then we'll kind of ease off again. This species, the Julia skipper, is one that we didn't pick up for a long time. And all of a sudden we started noticing this very plain drab skipper in the last, seems like to me, and Darlene can correct me, but seems like in the last 2 to 3, 4 years is when we really started noticing this butterfly. May have been there all along and we just didn't see it. It's not common and we don't see it a lot. The Julia skipper is kind of an interesting butterfly. First of all, it's fairly drab. There is a hint of a little bit of a bar right here, but you have to look at your screen pretty darn close to see it. And you can imagine out in the field, it's really hard to see as well. The other thing, here it is here, when we do a close up with another specimen right here, it's right there. And then there's this little hint of 3 spots right here as well. Can't really see that very well here. When the wings are open, you can see a couple of spots down here, which are fairly diagnostic, but most of the ones that I've seen, the wings have been folded. There is another butterfly. This, by the way, used to be known as the Western Swarthy Skipper. And there's a reason they call it, I wanted to bring that out, is because the next specimen we're going to look at is the Swarthy Skipper. The Swarthy Skipper, as I'm going to show you on a range map, is mostly to the east of us. And the Julia's is to the south and to the north and a little bit to the west. They do overlap a little bit, but this is mostly East Texas. However, that said, these are pictures by Darlene. And one of the characteristics that this butterfly has that's supposed to separate it from the previous species is that it has pale veins that are paler than the surrounding scales on the rest of the wing. And if you look at all these pictures, you kind of see that. They're not really supposed to have any white marks, and yet here's some that have a couple little hints of white mark, almost right here, a little hint of a pattern. So because they're so similar, I guess maybe you're going to have that little bit of overlap, but it makes identification really tricky. And again, this one is an eastern species. There are, in iNaturalist right now, there are 20 observations that have been identified as a swarthy skipper from Austin out to the New Braunfels area. Of those, only three or four, maybe three, have been research graded in iNaturalist as swarthies. The rest of them have not. And I looked at all of them, and most of them didn't look like swarthy skippers. I'm no expert, but it just didn't look right, and that's probably why nobody would have positively ID these. And even these that have been identified, it's been by just local folks here, and I wouldn't call any of us uh, experts, and I don't mean to insult anybody, but I'm throwing my name in the hat on that. These guys are just really tricky to identify. And then I want to show a picture from of Darlene's and a picture of mine to show you why. So here is, this was identified as a Julius skipper in iNaturalist. This is my photograph. This is Darlene's. This was identified as a swarthy. But notice that both of these have paler veins than the surrounding wings. Now, the swarthy is supposed to be a little bit darker, richer brown, which clearly is the case with the swarthy right here. But just because it says the swarthy has pale veins, and it doesn't say that about the Julias, doesn't mean that this can't happen. Because here's one that, if in fact that's a Julia's, and I believe it is, um, uh, they've got paler veins, so you can see that overlap right there. And then again, the pattern right here is just very indistinct, but it's there. And then the presence of these spots. So the question becomes, what's the best characteristic to identify these from one another? And I'm guessing maybe it's background color, because otherwise they look really similar. So we want to be very cautious about throwing these down and just assuming we know what a Julia's is versus a swarthy skipper, especially when we start looking at the range of these butterflies. They're really, in our area, they don't really overlap to any strong degree.
Hey, Craig, Darlene has a question
Yeah,
about the differences between the Eufaula and the Julius. Can you speak to that?
yeah, I can. I don't think I put a picture of those two up, but notice, remember I said the Eufaula has a longer wing. Notice that this wing is more upright. It's not extending beyond the hind wing very much. It's more of a sharper point right here. I guess I could go back. Let me back up a little bit. That's a good question. I should have thought of that. Now this one looks the opposite of what I just said. But here's the Julia's. See if I can back it up a little bit more. And here's the Eufaula. Um, to me, it just extends farther out. There's more of a triangle extending out here beyond the wing here than if we were to go forward. Let me flash forward. This one kind of lines up to me better as opposed to this extending beyond this margin right here. Let me go back one more time just so you can see it. See how this wing wraps around here and this one kind of extends out? And that's what I'm talking about. But again, you don't, there are, that actually is fairly similar, but this again is a kind of a paler, it's pale, but it's pale brown to tan to me. Whereas if we go forward, this one is more yellowish. And just there's a different look to it. This is much more triangular. The other one's a little more elongate. So I don't have a great answer there. It's one of those things, Darlene, when I see it, I know what the Eufaula is. When I see this, I have to really think about it. And because especially when I see it where it has the pale veins. The Eufaula doesn't seem to have those pale veins, at least the ones I've noticed. So that might be a help as well with identification. All right, so now let me get to this one. Again, here is these two guys, pale veined butterflies. Okay, we've identified this we think is a swarthy. We think this is a Julia's. And then a couple of years ago, I had this picture. Notice the pale veins. And I took this picture at Cibolo Nature Center. And I saw those pale veins and I thought, what the heck is that? So I sent this photograph off to Pomona, Butterflies and Moths of North America, and I said, "What is this butterfly?" It came back as a swarthy, and the guy that identified it, I was actually in graduate school with. Um, um, and or no, I was undergrad school in Arkansas, and he's a big expert on butterflies. Trust me, Herschel is. And he came back and he said, "Man, it's a little too far west for being a swarthy, but it sure looks like it's a swarthy." And as I was prepping this program, I ran across this photograph again, and I thought, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this picture, and I couldn't quite put my head around it until I got to these two butterflies, and I thought, wait a minute, this doesn't look right. And the thing that I started looking at was the leading edge of the hind wing, and notice how dark it is right here, all the way through. This one has kind of a pale goldish color. This one's very pale as well. It doesn't have that dark. Now, the angle of this picture was also very misleading to me. Um, and then the other thing that got me thinking again was this plant right here, which is false sneezeweed, but it grows in the marsh at the Cibolo Nature Center where I photographed it. I had also photographed another butterfly there a year or two before that and figured out what it was. And then it got me to thinking, oh my gosh, could this be another one of those that I photographed a couple of years prior? So I took another look at this. Again, there's the pale bands or pale veins, dark out here. I went to iNaturalist and I started looking at this species right here. And lo and behold, I found these pale veins like you see in this one. I saw the dark along the leading edge of the forewing. And then I also noticed that this one had a long, skinny abdomen, which this one does, but not from this angle. And it has black on the top of the abdomen. Well, I got to thinking to myself and I realized, oh my gosh, this is in fact a leaf skipper because this is a leaf skipper and that's a leaf skipper. And it shows me, it taught me a couple of things. Number one, I was trusting an expert on identification of this butterfly, and it turns out he was wrong. And that's okay. Um, I'm certainly not an expert, but it was through that deductive reasoning and really playing that out, and then realizing as I prepped for this program that, oh my gosh, this is not what the experts thought it was. So it just goes to show you again, these characteristics can overlap with other species, and we have to be careful of that and just know that that's possible. So speaking about the leaf skipper, of the three really small skippers, I call them skipperlings because they're so tiny. And this is the first one we're going to cover. It's really tiny. It's a very small butterfly. Here are my two photographs. This is with the wings open. Notice how dark here that it has on the hind wing. It's got dark here. It's got dark along the edges right there. And that makes this the leaf skipper. The other thing you'll notice is the black on the top of the abdomen. That's also makes it the leaf skipper. And here's that long kind of upturned end of the abdomen, which to me, I grew up with leaf skippers. And when I see that, I automatically think leaf skipper. But again, of the three that I'm going to show you, this is the least encountered. It's a very weak flying butterfly. It likes moist ground with lots of grass, and it just kind of hovers down there in the grass a lot of the time. So it's very easy to overlook. And in fact, in Texas, I've only ever seen the leaf skipper at Cibolo Nature Center in the marsh, usually late summer, early fall, even though it has a pretty extensive range around Texas. For whatever reason, of course, we don't have a lot of marshland around here as well. So that may be explain that we just don't have the habitat for a lot of these guys. But that little marshy area down at Cibolo seems to have them persist. The second skipperling I want to talk about is one of the two more common ones. This is the orange skipperling. It's named very well. It's bright orange, deep bright orange skipper. It's got a white belly you can see there, but no markings here, just beautiful, beautiful orange. This is taken where there's shade on the wing. This is taken in the bright sun. So you see some differences between those two, but that's lighting more than anything. When the wings are full or open, you can see that each wing has a dark bar, a dark line stigma on both of those wings. This bar being the stigma of the upper side of the hind wing, this bar being the stigma on the underside of the forewing, which when this wing is up, we don't see at all. The other thing you'll notice is it's got a nice whitish trim all the way around the backside of the margin of the forewing, which is can be seen fairly well. But again, here's a lot of it's gone. It's been rubbed off over time. By the way, this one used to be called the Western Tiny Skipper, but I like orange skipperling a whole lot better because it's a lot easier to remember. And then the other butterfly, which I think is actually tinier than the tiny skipper, formerly known tiny skipper, is the southern skipperling. And when I say it's smaller, it's ever so bit smaller, not a lot smaller. But this one's easy to identify when the wings are folded because it has a very distinct white bar through the center of the hind wing. You can see it there. You can see it right here. It's very distinct. Um, when it opens its wings, unfortunately, I don't have the backside of this, but there's a little bit of black, but not very much. You can see a little bit of black marking right there. But again, very small. And when the wings are folded, which is the case most of the time with this guy, is that white bar is very distinctive. You just can't go wrong in seeing that one. I should tell you that this one is a slower flyer than the orange skipperling, but the orange skipperling is still pretty fast. The southern skipperling is still pretty fast, but the orange skipperling really is fast when it's flying from flower to flower, so it can disappear in a heartbeat. All right, here are the three species together. So I wanted to point those out. You can see again the white bar right there on the southern skipperling. You can see no markings, just beautiful orange on the orange skipperling. And here we have the black on the abdomen, and then the pale bars, pale veins on the leaf skipper. So that's with the wings folded. When the wings are closed, or open, I'm sorry. When the wings are open, you can see some distinct differences. Here's that stigma that you see right there on the orange skipperling. You'll notice that this one has has a little bit of that barring as well. You really can't see it on the forewing, but the way this wing is folded, notice the veins are black on the southern skipperling. So if you get this view, look for those black veins because this guy doesn't have black veins on the orange skipperling. And then, of course, with the leaf skipper, again, you get the dark edging, and you get all the way around, and you get that black to the top of the abdomen. So fairly easy to identify these. I want to show you the range maps because it'll explain a little bit what's going on. Here's the leaf skipper around the San Antonio area. It's seen a little bit, but not very much. You'll notice the orange skipperling has a big more western 2/3 of the state, whereas the southern skipperling is mostly the eastern 2/3 of the state. They both overlap, obviously, but you can kind of see the split going east and west. And when you look at their nationwide distributions, you can see that the leaf skipper goes north, and then it goes to the west, or the east, I will say, and then whereas the southern goes east and the orange goes west. All right, had enough yet? We still got a little ways to go, but we're getting there. There's a lot of these little fellows, so I know it's been an hour, so we'll get wrapped up in another 15 minutes or so. So hopefully you can hang on. We're going to go to the roadside skippers. We generally have 3 roadside skippers that we might see in the area. That doesn't mean that another one couldn't show up, but these are the ones that I've experienced over all these years living in this part of Texas. And not that I've experienced every butterfly in this part of Texas, but it's certainly the 3 that we're most likely to encounter. The one that's the most common, at least in my experience, is the Celia's roadside skipper. It has a very distinct pattern on the underside of the hind wing. These little dots, kind of in an odd circle, if you will. Looks like a circle or a ball that got stepped on or something. But you can see these rows of kind of indistinct dots that are not all perfectly round. They're kind of different shapes. It has a very distinct checkered marking along the trailing edge of the forewing and the hind wing. So that's very noticeable about this butterfly. And again, here's just some variation as you look at them. They're very tiny. For example, of course, this is a Texas thistle, so you can see how tiny it is there. These are the individual flowers of frostweed. Again, you can see it can basically stand on one flower of frostweed. So again, watch for this one out there. But it's of the three, it's going to be the most common, and it's one that I can't always say this, but when I encounter them, it seems like the later we get in the summer, the more frequent they become. So keep that in mind. The second one is one that we don't encounter very often in our area, but we have recently encountered it a few times. Um, and that is the dotted roadside skipper. And this one has really distinct white roundish dots. It does have the checkered margins. The fringe is very checkered white and brown. It's kind of got a grayish brown overall appearance to it. But those spots are really distinctive for this little skipper. And in this one, not so much in this one, well, you can see it a little bit, but this one, you'll notice that the white dots are surrounded by black, and that can help you identify it. But again, you're not going to confuse this with anything else when you see this in our area. If you go farther west and you get into more roadside skippers, yes, there's some confusion there. So, but in our area, we should be pretty comfortable with identifying this guy. And just to show you how uncommon it is, here's the distribution in our immediate area. It's not been really recorded much in San Antonio area. A little bit here in Bernie, a little bit. That was at Cibolo Nature Center. I saw that there. Here's the park has seen that. I think it was Darlene's group that saw it one day, maybe more than once. But again, not very many sightings of this skipper. So when you see it, it's a good one to get for sure. The last one that I want to talk about in terms of the roadside skippers is the Nissa roadside skipper. It's a butterfly that um, instead of having spots, it actually has blotches of dark, intermediate dark color, brownish tan, and kind of off-white colors scattered around the wings. So no distinct spot patterns, just this mostly it looked like somebody, just started throwing paint at a wall. Fairly distinct butterfly to be identified. Of the three, when we look at a map, it's actually been seen more often than I would have guessed. But a lot of times down in San Antonio, a good number of times in San Antonio and points north. So watch for this if you're conducting surveys in the San Antonio area. Out at our park, we've recorded it. It's been recorded in Bernie. I think I've had it in my yard actually once. So it can be in the area, but for whatever reason, it doesn't get on our surveys, we don't see it very often, and perhaps we should be watching out for this a little bit more because it might be sneaking by us sometimes. Again, very small butterfly. I want to compare these three butterflies right here, the dotted roadside skipper with the celias. You can see how different those spot patterns are. And I threw in the green skipper just because it has those spots, but notice how much bigger they are. They're kind of lumped together. They're not really round like you see here. And they're not outlined in black. That's the other thing to notice. And this is a much more robust skipper, if you can say that about skippers, than these two species here. So again, of the three here, you're going to see the celias most commonly, the dotted next, and then the green skipper probably the least amount of times. We're very close. We're down to two species. All right, now we're going to cover two fairly long-winged skippers. One is the Ocola. The Ocola skipper is our largest grass skipper that we have out here. You'll notice that the hind wing extends a long ways beyond, or the forewing extends a long ways beyond the hind wing right here, and it's much narrower as opposed to being more of a triangular shape. It's much more in a straight line coming out here. A couple of things about this butterfly. We don't see it very often. It's a fairly uncommon butterfly. So when we do see it, it's a pretty big deal. Plus, it's so big compared to the other ones we see that it stands out. You'll notice that it can have a little bit of a signal, a highlight of a bar right through the middle of the the hind wing. This one's even fainter as it wears. This one's maybe a little fresher specimen, thus what being able to see that. When the wings are open, you can see that there are 3 spots, 3 to 4 spots right in here. And that's important because the next one I'm going to show you, even though it's smaller, the pattern is a little bit similar. So we'll want to compare those two. But again, if you see this one, and I don't encounter it very often around here, um, please do note it because it's a good one to see. Then we have the Brazilian skipper. By the way, that Ocola, its primary food source is rice. If that tells you anything about potential distribution of that butterfly and why it's not super common. Here's now the Brazilian skipper, and even though it's lumped in with the grass skipper, notice that its host plant is canna, which is not. Well, I guess it does have parallel veins, but I don't think of that. It's not a grass for sure. Um, but the Brazilian is a smaller than the Ocola, but it still has that long forewing extension. The other thing about this, it has 3 to 4 distinct little bars at kind of an angle or spots at an angle. And then when the wings are open, you'll notice there are many more very bold spots. It's much darker on the inside. That will help you separate it from the Ocola skipper, just so that you're aware of that. If we compare the two, here you can see the differences in color, overall color. And again, the Brazilian with those spots that it has versus the line, the faint line of the Ocola. So keep that in mind between these two large eyeballs for a butterfly like this, seems to me. And then again, with the wings open, the Ocola and the inside where the wings are open, you can see the number of spots varies quite a bit. Even though that large spot is got a similar shape to this, notice there are more spots around the Brazilian skipper on the that would be the dorsal side of the hind or the forewing. So keep that in mind. So that is a rundown of the closed wing skippers tonight. I know I threw a lot at you. I know I threw some variations and all the other confusion, but I wanted to point out to you that it can be very hard to identify these butterflies. And it's okay if it takes us some time, and it's okay if sometimes we have to put down skipper spa because that's going to happen. We try to identify everything we see, and sometimes we have to face the facts that we just can't for sure. So sometimes somebody will shout one out, and I go, "Did you get a good look at it?" It's not because I'm doubting you, but I want to make sure that if it's something, especially if it's unusual, that we are confident 100% confident in our identification. Now, let's talk about what's upcoming. The first thing I wanted to mention, because the park gets very busy on weekends now through the rest of the summer, we're going to move all of our surveys to Fridays. It's still busy out there, but we can get in and out, I think, because we'll be starting our surveys at 10 a.m. Most of the time, except for this Friday. We'll start at 10 a.m. We'll be out of there by 1 o'clock. So the other thing that we may start doing as well is reversing our order. We may go ahead and meet at the river first and get that done before all the crowds get there, and then move our way back to the beginning of the park so that we are not in the way of all that traffic down there. That said, just as I said that, I realized I did one thing wrong. We'll still meet at the gravel parking lot. We'll do that area first. We'll get in our cars, go straight to the river, do the river, and then we'll work our way back up to Topwell and end in Topwell on these surveys for the rest of the summer. Okay, so all of that said, our next two surveys are upcoming this Friday, July 10th. That's going to be our NABA, North American Butterfly Association, annual July 4th butterfly count. The count circle is the center of the circle is Guadalupe. This is a bigger count than the park, so we'll have a crew in the park counting the butterflies and listing the plants there. And then from there, we got a special treat this year. We have some volunteers who are going to cover the Cordillera area, the library over in Bulverde, Spring Branch, and that area over there. And then we traditionally will cover the park, and then we'll also cover Honey Creek. So we will meet and I should tell you on Fridays it can get really busy really early. So I would arrive, if I were you, I'd try to arrive at the park as soon after 8 o'clock as you can. And that'll hopefully give everybody a chance to get to the amphitheater by 8:30. And you can call, I'm going to have my number in here. You can write it down, but I will tell you a lot of times you can't get a signal down at the amphitheater, but you can, at least you'll have my phone number if you're stuck in a line. We're going to meet at 8:30 at the amphitheater. Sign in. Between Darlene and I, we'll cover the cost of the fee for the NAV account at the processing fee, so don't worry about that. Um, and if you're interested in, if you live in the Cordieri area or over by Spring Branch, Bulverde, and you want to count over there instead of coming to the park, just let me know by Wednesday. We're going to split into two teams. We're going to have a team do the park like we always do. That'll be led by Darlene. I will then take a crew of people over to the Spring Branch entrance to Honey Creek, and we'll survey those open fields over there like we traditionally do. We're going to do that right away so that we're not out there in the boiling heat. There is a chance of rain on Friday, but I'm hoping it's kind of an afternoon thunderstorm sort of thing so that it doesn't impact our survey. Not that I'm not wanting rain. And then the real thrill today on Friday is that thanks to the new superintendent of Honey Creek, Gilbert Martinez, he is allowing us to meet his intern at the front entrance to the new entrance to the new part of Honey Creek, which is 515 acres. It's the entrance is a big sign right there on Park Road 31 as you're heading into the park. We're going to gather there at 11 a.m. and she is going to allow us to go into the new area, and they've got a couple of miles of hiking trails. I've not been in that area. It's open. It's up in the uplands, so it's not on the creek. So don't expect to see Honey Creek in this part of the survey. But we're going to survey that area for the first time and include it in our survey area. We traditionally don't survey down in Honey Creek because it's generally just solid forest, and we always run out of time because of the heat. So we've traditionally not covered that specific area, but this will add another 500 acres of upland, grassland, open woods, I think is mostly what we're going to encounter. So the surveying there should be good. That will be the last area we'll survey for the day. So we're going to meet there at 11. The group from the park, the group from the Spring Branch Road will all gather there, go in, spend a couple of hours counting butterflies there, how much time we need. And then for anybody that's interested, this is lunch on your own, by the way. We're going to go down the road just a piece to the El Jalisco Mexican restaurant, which I think is a pretty good Mexican restaurant. And we can gather for lunch and talk about what we saw and tally up our numbers and all of that good stuff. So that is the plan for this Friday. If we get rained out, I will try to let everybody know. I'm going to have to make a guess. If it's obviously raining, we're not counting butterflies, but I'll be watching the weather intently this week. So if we run into some potential problems for Friday morning, I'll let everybody know Thursday night by 8 o'clock. Okay. 8 o'clock p.m. on Thursday night. But other than that, we should be able to be good to go to explore a new area, and maybe that'll turn into something. We'll just have to wait and see. But I hope everybody that wants to join us on that will be able to do that because I think it's going to be exciting. They'll be opening that sometime this late summer, early fall period, so you're going to kind of get a sneak peek of it, if you will. So we want to be very respectful and all of that good stuff, obviously, as I would expect us always to be. I do want to thank, I did use a lot of resources for these training sessions, and I want to acknowledge those. Obviously, the Kaufman guide, the Swift guide, which I don't use in the field, but I use in my office all the time. A great book called The Butterflies of North America. It came out in 1986. It's a huge tome of photographs and natural history information of all the butterflies in North America. And of course, a lot of that's outdated, but that's where I got some of my older names for what these used to be called. I had to rely on the scientific names to find some of them because the common names were so different. I used a book that I've been familiar with when I was up in the Kansas City region. That's how I learned about how many skippers actually are rare up there, but they show up in late summer because they migrate north from Texas and Oklahoma. and then also the butterflies and moths of Missouri for the same reason. And then I looked at a lot of those research articles by Zhang and Kong and Grishin that are doing the species identification work. And then I relied on the two websites, Butterflies and Moths in North America, the Pomona website, and then iNaturalist as well. So that's I don't. This all is just magic that I've learned all this. I've had to do a lot of digging and research, and I hope that these sessions have been good for everybody and that you've learned something that maybe you didn't know before. I've tried to be as accurate as possible with all the photographs, verifying them, and then with all of the information as well. So hopefully, again, this has been a useful process for you. I do want to thank the Alamo Area Master Naturalists because they're the ones that hosted these webinars, if you will. I don't have a subscription to this platform, and so we were going to run out, obviously, every time because they only give you 35 or 40 minutes. I especially want to thank Jeanette Gieman for helping set this up and getting, and of course, Robert. I can't thank him enough for all of the work he's currently doing, and which we'll be rolling out soon to everybody. But then also for being orchestrating this each month on a Monday night, and then working with Jeanette to get this going in the first place. So thank you, Robert. Thank you, Jeanette. I know she's not here, but thank her anyway. And then I want to thank all of you for attending these, um, and also for the help that you've provided at this long-term survey. We started informally with these surveys in 2012 at the park when I was there as the interpreter. When I came back from my after my first day, and then I left and I came back, and then we got more serious as we kept going along in the years. And then we started collecting plant data, flowering plant data. And then recently I was talking to Robert, just to give you a little background about the fact that I have all this data, but I'm not a data guy. I can collect data, but I'm not sure how to process all that data. So I wanted to make sure that to see what we could do with it. And Robert happens to be like gung ho for this sort of thing. Um, and he has created a platform. I won't say too much about it, but he's created what is an amazing platform for all of our butterfly data, all of our plant data. We have now gotten all of the butterfly data except for the last 3 or 4 surveys. We're going to get that data put in before we roll it out, as he's been creating it. And we just got all of the plant data to Robert, and he's working on that now. We've still got a few glitches to match up common names with iNaturalist common names, and make sure all of the dates for the what it said for the date on the butterfly survey and on the plant survey match up. So we've got those little tweaking things to do, and then we will be letting folks know about a time when we can all get together. And Robert, he gets to do most of the talking on this thing, but he's going to roll this out and show us how we all get to access the data, what the data is teaching us. Um, and I don't want to say anything more because I don't want to steal any of his thunder, but it's spectacular. And then the other thing, just to let you know as well, is that we're going to continue to do these surveys for as long as the park allows us to do the surveys. It's this long-term data that tells us things like trends in butterfly numbers and things like that. So it becomes more valuable the longer we do it. Um, and but I can't thank. There are so many people, and we've lost a few of those surveyors over the years. And I sure wish they knew what their early work has helped spawn and grow. And for Kip and Mary and some other folks, I wish they were here to see what all of this means. So, but we will all enjoy it, and we're going to learn from it. And not only that, then the next step after this gets going is to start publishing this information, not only in more scientific type journals, but then also to the public, to try to get the information out there to let people know, and then how other people in other places can start these kind of long-term projects to really roll out what's going on. So anyway, that's a lot of talking. I apologize for that. But I want to again thank everybody. Everybody's efforts have been super important to the success of this, and I can't thank everybody enough for helping us out. Valerie, I see Valerie's on here tonight. I'm glad that she's here because she it's played a major role in what we did with getting the data where it is now, and Deb Deb Deborah has been taken over the mantle from her after Val took over the mantle from Mary. And so anyway, that's where we are right now. If you have any questions, that's great. You can see my contact information down there. And again, that's all I've got. I don't know if Robert's stepped away or not. I see
No,
his,
no, no. I'm here, but before we get too far,
yes.
we do have a question from Darlene.
Okay. Okay.
So when are the Dragonfly workshops starting? Do you have a date for that yet?
Jeez. I
I
just
know,
talked about
Darlene, right?
that's okay.
That's a good one.
I really want to teach them. I've actually started organizing my slides. Um, but that could probably be, I hate to say it, but it's probably going to be at least a few months. And the reason for that, and of course, right now is the peak season. I have an old presentation. I may try to just refreshen that and get new data into it, and so that we're ready to go before the season ends on dragonflies. And Robert, I'll be talking to you and seeing if we can talk to Jeanette about Alamo's involvement again with that, because that would be a probably a two-part workshop, one on dragonflies and one on damsels. And so let me get there first and see what we can do. But I don't have a date for that. Sorry, Darlene. Sorry.
Yeah,
I'm
and
still chasing down. I'm still chasing down species too. So
yeah, and I don't think Jeanette would have an issue. I mean, I will say this, Craig. Thank you for offering these workshops. I know there are folks that have used the videos. They weren't able to make the live trainings, but they've referenced the videos, and so I appreciate your expertise. I know that it's now we have these videos. I think it's going to be a great refresher set for us, especially now we've got that knowledge captured, and so I just it's an incredible resource that we have to have those available. And like you say, within a few years, we'll probably have to do a refresh of those because the species
right, right,
are being split.
right.
But thank you for that.
Sure.
And
And
so
I don't know if I told her, but I took all of those recordings and I downloaded them onto my YouTube page. So they're there, and I provided links to those through my Facebook page. So there have been actually several people that have that didn't attend these because they didn't know about them. So we're trying to get that. I hope that's okay to share that information out,
yeah,
um,
I don't see an
Robert.
issue with that. I mean, I think all of these are here, they're essentially open to the public. I mean, we just publicize them through our
Right.
normal channels, but I think the information that's provided, especially as it relates to our area, this whole region, I think that that's perfectly fine to make those accessible.
Okay.
Any other
Sure.
questions before we wrap up? I did see the one. Tina, yes, I think that anybody that's on our butterfly notifications for trainings will also get the dragonfly notification whenever we get those scheduled. So yes, you are on the list there. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording here.